gigs where I got called on a Friday night at 9 p.m. To be in Miami at Saturday morning on 7 a.m. I guess the front house engineer that they had, they weren't digging what he was doing, so they gave me a ring, and so I came in. So literally, I was coming into already an existing show that I think you'd done like 3 shows before I got there, 3 or 4.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And so literally I come walking in the door, guns a-blazing, going, here we go. We got a show later on today. Let's do this. And Tim, from the start, was super gracious and explained all of the things that were going on, and kind of really helped me through that. And we really developed a friendship after that. He is fantastic at what he does. It's kind of why we asked him to be here. And we thought that you guys might get something out of having a system engineer here talking. We're going to talk a little bit about audio, but we're also going to talk a little bit more about like relationships. That's kind of why we're here. You know, we started this podcast for the whole reason that Tater and I have this long-term relationship, and we talk about, you know, we do things on either end of the snake that we don't even talk about anymore because it's been 18 years together. So I know that the way that Tater works, I can rest assured that he's doing what he needs to do on that end of the snake while I'm doing what I need to do. And we both kind of know what's going on, and we have this relationship where we don't really talk all that much anymore. I mean, outside of the gig, we still talk and hang and we're friends. But when we're at the gig, we literally, there's nothing that we don't have to communicate almost anymore because we know what each other is doing. Tim, can you talk a little bit about the relationship of, a system engineer in regards to monitor engineer and front of house engineer, and how that kind of works? Because I think our relationship became that as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting because usually by the time a system engineer gets hired onto a tour, the monitor engineer and the front of house mixer, they've both been in rehearsals with the band. And so even if they haven't worked together before, they've already got a relationship happening. And so then the quote unquote head of audio, as far as production is concerned, then comes in, and I have to make a trustworthy impression very quickly upon first meeting a person at the first gig. And it can be a bit daunting, to be completely honest with you. Trying to wrangle a crew and any of the other things that have to happen in that given day, plus get enough time to have a conversation over lunch, which, you know, as we all know, that can just, lunch in itself can be challenging.
Lunch can be tough.
You know, and so like when I worked with you, Pooch, I mean, you were coming into an interesting situation wherein there was already an established crew and things like that, and the artist wanted to make a change. Whereas when I first worked with Tater and Paul, the monitor tech stage guy on Linkin Park, they'd been working together for, I mean, how long was that, Tater? Definitely years.
Yeah, I think 2005.
Yeah, so I mean,
like an old married couple, that
was. They're totally like that. Those Muppet guys, those old Muppet guys in the corner, Mortimer and whatever.
No. That's you and Tater, dude. Come on, you can't take that away.
Yeah. So I was gonna say, Tim, like when you come in, you have to like you saw the relationship with me and Paul, and then you were already there before Pooch got there. You have to figure out all those kind of relationships and determine how to deal with them and what the situation is and how it works together as a team. And you are kind of coming, I like how you said you come in a little bit later, and then you got to figure all that out. And now usually be the, which I don't believe in this. I don't believe in the front of house guy, systems guy being the crew chief. Me personally, I don't believe in that, but you have to do that a lot because Clair seems to kind of follow that philosophy. But you got to figure all those angles out of everybody, and then wrangle your team and then the independent team. Is there any any tricks in that, or are you just good at reading people?
I think you become really good at reading people really quickly. And unfortunately, sometimes that means you've might have gotten the wrong impression. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, definitely it's got to be a split-second decision because you haven't got a lot of time on the first day. And the whole idea, from my perspective, at any rate, is that we all are one cohesive unit, and the vision of the artist is what's represented, and to try to step out away from that as far as ego and things like that. And so I just try to be humble and honest and talk about expectations and what both sides of the snake are looking for, first of all, so that we can all come together, and it's just not a gnashing of teeth. Because I mean, gnashing of teeth one day is that's bad enough, but for 8 months of a tour, that's not sustainable at all.
No, that's definitely not sustainable. You brought up a really good point, Tater. It's funny, Tim, I had thought about that whole thing about there is already some established relationships. Sometimes for a month and a half, I'll do rehearsals before I even show up. And you're walking in to the very first day of that. That's got to be crazy. It probably feels a lot like me walking into that Travis Scott gig, like going, oh man, all these people know each other. I'm just this dude that's showing up and like trying to do my job. That's crazy, man. I'm glad you brought that point up. I forgot what I was going to ask you. Anyway, you're muted, Jim. Sorry.
Yeah. How about now? I said he takes on a lot of heat in that role. He's got to navigate your desires, Pooch. He's got to make it work with Tater and Pablo. And then, there's the big show that's got to happen. And there's the load in the load out that's got to happen. So coming into that new and, as the thing's rolling out without any of the established relationships is genuinely a challenge, because he's also the guy you're asking to kind of navigate the relationships as well.
No, that's very true. And Tater, you brought up another great point, which is, in my opinion, right now, I'm with Tater on this, that a system engineer shouldn't necessarily be the crew chief. I kind of feel like it's a better situation where the system engineer, who has all of these other stressors in his life, dealing with a front of house guy and a monitor guy, and getting there early and measuring the room, and all of those kind of things that are not related to dealing with the production manager as far as a crew chief, and dealing with making sure that the trucks are getting backed in and unloaded, and all those kind of things. I
just feel they're out on an island, taking care of even more now than ever. They're taking care of some critical needs at front of house, because the front of house engineer now has so much going on that a guy like Tim's out there on an island. What happens when the stage manager needs him, the production manager, the lead truck driver or something? He's out there on the island. You need someone back, in the back somewhere where easily you can get to for loadout meetings, all that kind of stuff. That's why I just never thought that's a great idea to have that guy on the island out there that is not accessible to be the voice all day for the head of the crew. But what I was going to ask about the front of house position, because I don't know this, but not only dealing with the crew, when somebody's mixing, Tim, Pooch is at the console, and he's doing his stuff and everything. What happens, like, the management and the production manager or the band's wives or whoever, they don't go to the mixer, do they? Do they go to you and talk and say, hey man, I couldn't hear this guitar, or this over here is not right? Aren't you usually the conduit between those higher up people and the mixer?
I make him be that conduit.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
I don't want to talk to those people.
I don't know. Do all mixers want you to be that guy also?
I mean, it depends on the mixer and his relationship with the family or management of the artist. But yeah, traditionally, I mean, anybody who's trying their best to do whatever it is they do, to have constant interruptions with that, I mean, that's not productive. So I do tend to try to be the first point of contact, and then if it's something more serious, then we can have a conversation about it, maybe when there's not 20,000 people sitting around us.
Yeah. It's a weird place. It's a weird place to be, right? Because ultimately, anything regarding audio falls on the front of house and the monitor guy. Like if anything's bad goes down, something doesn't get patched or something crazy happens with the PA or whatever, I'm the guy that gets pulled into a dressing room. Tater's the guy that gets pulled into a dressing room. Yet you are like actually kind of the guy that's driving the machine. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's a hard relationship. It's an important relationship, I think, more than ever. You know, I've said this a few times about how I feel like the skill set of a system engineer is much different than the skill set of a mixer. And it's best when both guys are really good at what they do. You know, I think we should talk a little bit maybe about Travis Scott, just because that was an unusual situation where I was mixing from behind the stage in dressing rooms and such.
Yeah, that has all its own whole other list of things going on. And I mean, you're in the hallway. People sometimes don't know what you're doing and they're distracting you. You know, where's the bathroom or something? You're there trying to mix, right? I mean, what goes on back there, you know?
I literally.
Why was that the case, Pooch? I don't know if people know why you were in the back mixing.
Oh, got it. So the reason that we were mixing front of house from the back was because there was absolutely no room for the traditional front of house to be out on the floor. There were two complete stages that were connected by some, staging basically. And so in order to have, people, standing room on the floor, there was no room to put front of house. It just didn't exist. And so we got moved. I think, well, the first place was where, Tim? What did they do to us at first?
Oh yeah, it was fantastic. They put us in the ADA section in the 100 level seats.
Yeah, we could literally like reach over and order a hot dog while we were mixing.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Just drunk people with their drinks just over the console, all the rest of it.
People high-fiving us like we're in the crowd. Like, what is happening?
Another defensive type situation that I'd never been in before either. We got computers that are running the whole show, and you've got a drunk guy with his beer trying to spill his drink into it. Like, it's gonna get really quiet if you do that, bud.
It was pretty crazy, man. Like, and literally I walked into that. I don't think I may have known that or anyway, I didn't fully get it until I got there. And they're like, yeah, they're up right by where the pretzels are. That's where you're mixing. Which was not great. And it is the reason why after a while of that, I can't remember how many shows we did, but after a while of that, we said, you're going to get much better results if you move us backstage. But then they moved us, like in the VOM. And so like what you said, Tater, stage hands would walk up with a Coke and a sandwich and like start talking to you in the middle of the show. Like, hey, what's going on? What are you doing back here?
Now, Tim, did you have any position at the, somewhere in the normal front of house position at all? You would walk out with a tablet wirelessly or, what was your communication to keep Pooch informed while he was in the hallway? I just taken it that you were out in the audience every once in a while, keeping tabs on what was going on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, doing the whole normal walk thing and all the rest of it. That audience tends to be a bit lively. Is that where I'm going with that?
Yeah.
So I traditionally didn't walk with a tablet during the show because it was going to be, out of my hands long before I was ready.
Frisbeed across the arena.
Yeah. So we did have an RTA mic out at front of house so that we could look on smart as to our amplitude response, our SPL, all kinds of crazy things like that, and sort of laugh at the things that we had to do for the artist because of how loud he wanted it to be.
Yeah, that's definitely, we should speak to that because this was Travis Scott, so there was a crazy amount of sub information happening. I think, do you remember what we were measuring subs at? It was crazy. It was like
C-weighted, we were in the high 140s.
Yes.
So almost 150 C-weighted inside an A-market arena. Yeah.
Boy, was I glad to be behind the stage somewhere in a dressing room. Oh man. Yeah, I mean, that's sub information, that's C information, just so you guys understand that. It was a loud show, you know, but it was probably, A weighted was what, like 104 most of the time, or 103, I think.
Wait, who are you talking to? You're usually around 121. You know, 121, 122, whatever it takes.
Yeah, whatever it takes.
That's what he tells. That's what he tells the monitor engineer too.
I will tell you, in a show like that, that is so ridiculously loud, and the artist wants the low end information that loud. And honestly, the crowd wants it too. Those were kids, like 13, 14-year-old kids that all wanted to, you know, they all have cars that have sub in it, and they, you know, they wanted to feel it. I mean, they came to the show for that. I think that I got a better result getting away from that. Like, without getting pummeled, I could really, you know, listen to the detail of what was happening. And so I honestly believe, like, if we were going to do it again, and even if there was room at front of house, I would still like request it. How about you, Tim? You?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, it was one of those things where at those kind of SPL, I mean, you might as well be, I mean, come on, no reasonable person mixes that loud unless they're told to, right? So then it would be like putting any normal person behind the wheels of a race car. You're just white knuckle. You don't know when you're shifting. You don't know when you're from the gas to the brake, all the rest of it. And so you're just along for the ride, right? So yeah, it definitely, I mean, it was amazing how much the vocal cleaned up and the subtle nuances. I know nuances at 120 dB, but you know, subtle nuances that really helped the overall aspect of the crowd's sort of participation. It really helped moving us with about 3 feet of concrete between us and the show.
Totally.
now, Tim, let me ask you this question. I don't really venture into that type of music, but if there was that much sub information going on with a legacy metal band, I'd have you up there on the stage, you know, fixing that, making sure it at least wasn't, or doing your best to come up there. Is that true with all monitor engineers and other veins of music? Are they asking the same thing I'm asking about keeping that sub information off the deck?
For legacy acts, yes. For some of these younger guys that want it to feel like the club, especially in the rap R&B genre, yeah, they want it to feel like a club. They want it to be just heavy low end, and I think it helps them get hyped, you know. So
I think that you know, think about that. That's a 180 degree, totally different skill set. Tater is working with bands. I'm working with bands that don't want any sub information. So you have to be good at that. You have to be a system engineer that says, hey, I'm going to deploy the sub information and point it in a direction that none of it is coming back on stage for those kind of artists. And then 180 degrees, I work for Kanye West, and that stage better be blown back as much sub as it is blowing forward. Those are two totally different skill sets to have. Let me back up a little bit. Like, where do you come from, Tim? Like, where did you learn this skill set of learning all of those things? Like, where do you come from being a musician? Help us to understand how you ended up at Clair Brothers.
Well, I'm sort of the black sheep of the family. Everybody else is a musician, and I always felt way more comfortable being on the other side of the microphone. So I'm a nerd. I've always really liked the puzzle. I've liked the science behind things. I've liked to understand how to make things work, and you know, just using a given skill set to get the best result you can. So that's sort of where I come from. And then, you know, there's just trying to make everybody happy, right? You know, on both ends of the snake, because obviously your punchy kick drum in front of house, if it's destroying the bass player on stage, then the band's not going to have a good night. And then, well, all of a sudden you're not going to have a good night, right? So if we can all come to a consensus together and make it to be the best it can be across, like what you guys were saying last week, with if audio starts at the stage and then continues out into the audience, those two items can't be fighting each other, can they?
Well,
No, it's true.
I take it Travis Scott didn't have a bass player, right? That was right.
That is correct.
No.
Okay.
No, Travis Scott had a DJ who wanted so much low end, and he wanted so much low end. It was crazy.
So I mean, I can see for the I don't know who was doing monitors on that tour. You guys can probably elaborate, but for him, he maybe needed that information up there because they wanted that. I would suspect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and I mean, Tim can probably help us to, if we want to get into this a little bit more technically. As soon as you have multiple sources of all kinds of sub information, not only the ones that are up on stage, but the ones that are pointed at front of house, and the ones that are flown, you start having multiple sources. There's all kinds of chances for cancellation, and so you could be making the entire arena just pumping, but in that section where the DJ is, maybe there's a null point right there, and so Tim has to be the guy to kind of figure that out. I'll take you a little bit on the day and then let you talk to that, Tim, in that, I went out in the afternoons after the PA was deployed. We would play a thing coming from the DJ, which is basically like doing virtual playback, right? Like, because that was the only thing coming from there. I'll tell you, it was 4 inputs, and it was the hardest 4 inputs I've ever mixed in my entire life. And mainly because it was a DJ that had all kinds of controls over filters and, volume. And there was files that were WAV files and files that were MP3 files. And so from song to song, there was crazy amounts of changes, and also crazy amounts of stuff that I had to do to kind of counteract what this DJ was doing every day. So it was crazy, like the hardest inputs I've ever mixed. And mainly that's because you can't hide, right? There's stereo left and right. If it's screwed up, if he has left the high pass filter in up to 400 and doesn't realize that it's in there, that's what I get to mix, like no low end. And that happened a few times. It's a hard enough thing, but in the afternoon, we would both go out and listen in the arena, an empty arena, and kind of walk around a little bit and talk a little bit about information. Usually it was always talking about sub information and the monitor engineer being on the stage and communicating with him. And then from that point on, I have this trust. I have to trust Tim that he knows what sounds good, and he knows to make the right changes in order to make my mix that I think is good in my dressing room translate into this huge thing. So it's a whole kind of other level of trust, right, Tim?
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, traditionally you'd be sitting in front of house and you'd know exactly what you were doing, and you'd be able to make changes real time in the PA and have a real time response from that. That's not really what happens when you're mixing on near fields in a studio environment in a dressing room.
This is not happening.
Yeah. So, I mean, we definitely spent a lot of time walking around in circles, going from the dressing room back to back out into the bowl. But it was such a weird thing anyways, that those SPL, your ears start shutting down almost immediately anyways. And so, you'd be out there for 5-10 seconds and just not even understand what you were hearing anymore anyways.
Oh, good God.
Let me ask this, Tim. I'm going to get away from Travis Scott for a second. You're on tour and you do let's just say a US tour, and you're using Cohesion and all that Clair fun stuff. And then you go to Europe or wherever else, and you're doing festivals, and obviously festivals are, there could be an Adamson or L Acoustics or D&B PA in there and all that stuff. What's your communication like between the engineer, you, and then maybe the house systems engineer? Like, you've got another level there of someone you have to communicate with to get it to be like the mix he had on the Cohesion PA, right? Translate to the other PAs. Is that a lot harder to do when you've got another layer and another guy, or do you know all those systems and how they react and how to tell that guy exactly what to do?
I wouldn't say that I know them all as though I could be deployed with every single one of them. I mean, there's so many different proprietary control softwares out there. But at the same time, Really, a lot of that has to do with how the mix was originally built, if that makes any sense. If the mix was built on, say, a pair of monitors and then translated into a PA, then for the most part, that mix is going to translate into almost every PA out there. I mean, so long as you don't get stuck with something that isn't worth using, but that's so not commonplace anymore. So it really depends on, in that instance, having a very experienced front of house mixer that understands how to make his mix translate and already know what he is expecting and what the weaknesses are out of any given product. I mean, I wouldn't say that there's any such thing as a bad PA in 2020. There's definitely, I prefer chocolate and today it's strawberry. But then understanding the tips and tricks as far as working around the PA that you didn't get to decide to use. Yeah, I think that's just an experience thing, isn't it? You know, unfortunately, I know that when I worked with you, Tater, we did a Fezzy run across Europe, and that was, I mean, there were a couple of days where we had the same PA, but it definitely wasn't deployed the same way.
Right, right. Definitely not deployed the same way.
Yeah. So then the struggle then was mostly the language barrier. You know, if that makes any sense, because one day you're talking to a guy whose native tongue is French, and the next you're talking to a German. Yeah. So that was really the only difficult part, because for the most part, on that level of festival, there's yet again no ego. It's just, we want to make sure that this is what you want, and we all just try to teamwork it out, you know.
Here's an interesting question, Tim. You know, there's probably a bunch of people that are watching right now that are aspiring system engineers, right? If I were a guy that saw the promo for this, I'd be like, oh, system engineer, I want to learn about what's going on. What is your ultimate, what are you looking for in a mixer? Like, how do you want me to be? Like, what's your best case scenario of a mixer? What can you, you know, besides, you know, obviously getting a good mix to deal with, what are you looking for in someone like myself or Tater?
Open, honest communication about expectations, if that makes any sense. If you're playing your cards really close to the vest and you don't tell me what you expect out of the PA, then the two of us are not going to have a great time together. And to that end, one of the things that you did early was you laid out, these are the things that I expect out of a PA. This is how I would like it to react. And that was very simple and easy for me to get around. Some of the other guys, they're like, well, you can't see my secret sauce. This is only for me. Goodness, and then really? Before you know it, what he's doing at the desk is completely 180 degrees from what I was trying to do with the PA, because
that's what I was going to bring that up. That was actually going to be my next question to guys. I was going to say, working for Clair, you're getting put on tours. Not only you're requested on, but they're just putting you on tours and filling gaps and stuff like that. Now, sometimes you have to kind of, when that guy's at lunch, look at his desk, see what he's EQing and see if he's got a bunch of stuff pulled out and you're putting it back in. And are you fighting each other that way? And sometimes, or does it always, is always that communication usually there?
The communication is definitely there. I think it depends on whether or not the person feels like they need to be scared for their gig. And trust me, I'm not trying to take a front of house mixer's gig. I don't want it. But at the same time, one of the things that I've been trying to get into my toolkit is taking a left-right out of the console and looking at it on Smart, and looking at an amplitude response, looking at the way that the frequency, the expected frequency response is leaving the console, and then try to tailor the PA towards what he's already doing, if that makes any sense.
No, I think a great answer. Because I mean, I think I know a guy like Pooch, when he hands somebody those two left and right XLRs, he knows what's coming out of that for sure. Right. You know, if you're coming in the first day, he knows what those two XLRs sound like. So that was a good answer.
And to me, the best guy is the guy that can take that information. That's why I myself am communicative about that. Hey, these are my needs. Because number one, you're way better at that, Tim, than I am. You know what I mean? It's like, I turn to you and say, okay, I'd like my PA to be like this. Like, for instance, I know that you know that I am the guy that wants his PA like super linear, right? Like I want a little hump in the low end, but then I want like all the way out, man, to like, 14, 16K. I want those sparkly bits, and let me do it, in the mix. And if I didn't communicate that to Tim along the first kind of couple of times that we met, or first couple of shows, if I hadn't said, hey, I want this linear PA, he might have done the traditional PA that a lot of guys want, which is more of a tilt in the high end, right? Yeah, exactly. Which, that's fine. That's how some guys work, right? Some front of house guys like to have overemphasize their sparkly bits in their mixes. And the reason that they do that is probably so that they can hand the record version of that can be nice and sparkly to whoever. But I kind of think about it differently. I have a record bus that I maybe do some extra to give the board mix away, but I want the most linear PA. Do you find that a lot, Tim? Like, is that pretty normal these days, or are you finding more the traditional tilty, not so much high end guys?
No, I think I'm finding that the majority of the mixers out there want what you'd call the L-acoustics frequency response.
Okay.
Which is the haystack, and then very linear, and it goes all the way on out to 16, 18, something like that. And that's most often what somebody's looking for. Every once in a while, you'll get with a hip hop mixer that really, really wants a smiley face EQ. So over exaggerated top end, over exaggerated low end, and nothing in the middle. But that's really, really rare, as from my experience.
How do you accommodate a bunch of mixers? Like, what if you're on a tour where there's like 5 different mixers? What do you do? And they all want different things from that PA. What's your solution?
Yeah, that one's a whole different sort of can of worms, isn't it? Because a lot of times direct support and or other support acts, they didn't get to make the decision on what the PA is. They just bring their console, or maybe they don't, and they have to use what's sitting in front of them. And so sometimes getting over that hurdle can be fun. And then there's also just different expectations of how they use it. And so traditionally, most of that can, if it's a correctly deployed PA, most of those subtle nuances that any given mixer would want can be done on a separate EQ page that can be saved within any one of the control systems. If they're wanting to do something really crazy, then yeah, so long as there's time to load a whole new preset for the entire PA, sure. I'm happy to accommodate. I don't care. Worked with a guy who, sorry.
I personally, I come from a place where when I was the engineer for opening acts, I was like, shut up, shut my mouth, and just did whatever anybody else, I'll deal with it, and so I kind of learned how to work in other people's spaces. You know what I mean? So if the headliner has a way of tuning the PA, then I show up as the opener, and I don't say, hey, you got to change everything. I say, okay, now I'm going to figure out how to make my thing work within those parameters. So it's a little strange for me. And I see it more and more as the headliner. I'm seeing more and more guys that are up and coming and start demanding all kinds of things from the PA. So it's a kind of a different mindset. And so I was just wondering how you deal with that. It's hard, because you work for a company, so you have to accommodate, right?
Right. And, what's interesting about that, talking back to the relationship thing, usually by the time the support acts show up to the venue, even if you're doing rehearsals, it's either the day before the show or the show day. So then they come into the same thing that I'd come into a week prior, where everybody knows each other and they don't know anybody. And, then it's a whole new version of building this relationship of trust. And that can be difficult sometimes, if that makes any sense.
And it's a whole nother element, and a whole nother set of faces and all that kind of stuff, that you got to learn that whole dynamic and how that engineer is going to work and what he's going to set up and tear down. Is he going to do his snake? Is he going to do it a changeover? All those kind of stuff. But what I was going to ask you is, when you're dealing with all those kind of aspects, which I think the system engineer has become a job in itself now in the last, I don't know how many, 10, 15 years of its own standalone job, especially because now in the front of house guys got to record, you know, the hi-hat and in every bridge so the drummer can hear it the next day and put it on an MP3 form and all that kind of stuff. You know, they're busy doing other tasks that they were never tasked to do before, which is leaving a lot more on your plate now, especially if he's off doing that or buried in that. You're now answering to the monitor engineer and answering all the rest of those crew's questions. So I know that system engineer job has become a lot more to let the front of house guy focus on those recordings and all the other stuff that they have to do along with just mixing the show. So I know it's, I just want to say, I know it's a big job that's evolved a lot throughout the years.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I want to try to answer some of these questions as we're talking here, because that's always fun to get it in the live stream a little bit. So as you were talking, Tater, I was kind of looking through some of these questions. And one of them, Dan Vanieri says, question for Tim: what is the weirdest request you got from a front of house engineer?
Great question.
And please don't say it's from me.
No, definitely.
You don't have to mention any names.
You don't have to mention any names.
Weirdest
But you
request.
can.
That's interesting. I definitely had one of them look at me and go get me a coffee boy. And I said, well, I'm your assistant.
That happened, really?
You can walk your ass to catering and do that for yourself.
Wow.
Weirdest request. That's a really good question. I mean,
has somebody ever asked you like to do something that, man, you would never do, or, you know, something just odd, like hang the PA 30 feet higher than you would, or any kind of weird kind of request?
Yeah, I did recently work with a person that he fancied himself his own system engineer. And so he made lots of determinations on how high, specifically how high the PA should be flown and all kinds of other things, and wasn't really interested in discussing it. That was interesting, you know.
Wow. That makes for an interesting relationship, I would say, at front of house. What'd you do? Just take a seat back, let him make all the decisions, and you just kind of accommodate what he was asking, or was he just
prepared boxes?
Yeah,
well, I mean, so that was the traditional role of a system engineer, you know, was push boxes, hang boxes, go to the bus. You know what I mean? Like, don't even here's the keys to the thing. You figure it out. You know what I mean? But now it's so much more different with, you know, having guys that are good like Tim, you know, making those kind of decisions. But Tim, that must be, what is that like? Because I am an engineer that depends on his system engineer very much. It's a skill set that I don't want to know about. I basically want to turn to a guy and say, hey, what's happening over there? Fix it. As opposed to, I know, you know, lots of engineers that are, you know, like you said, fancying themselves as system guys. What's that like, working with a guy that does that? Like, how do you handle that situation?
Well, honestly, my first response was to be insulted, and that wasn't the correct response. It just he didn't mean it in an insulting way. But you know, it's a situation where anymore your system engineer is going to be highly trained in what he does. I mean, L Acoustics even has certificates that prove that you have done training classes and that you are certified to use their products. And so I think, in my opinion, a person who would discount that amount of training is a bit remiss, but that's also not necessarily for me to say, is it? You know, I'm not going to change somebody's opinion overnight.
No, absolutely. I think that some of it comes from, there's some older school engineers that are used to that. Like that's what we used to have to do. Seriously, like the system engineer would say, okay, here's your, the PA's on and it's all working. Good luck. And that's where I think maybe that comes from. Do you find that it's older engineers usually, or is it young ones too?
It's some of both. Really and truly, I think it just depends on maybe their experience. Maybe they had a couple of bad experiences and they're holding on to that. I'm not sure. What I traditionally like to do though is stay science related when it comes to things like that, so that the front of house mixer can stay on the art side of things.
That's great. That's
great answer.
That's really
Great
cool, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Let's talk a little bit about the monitor side of this. And I think probably that you have more situations where you're going to have to accommodate monitor engineers for the specifics that they need, right? And Tater, maybe you can speak to this, but also you, Tim. How do you deal with that relationship where monitor guys are showing up for, and there's 3 opening acts and they all want wedges here, they all want an ear mix, they all want all these things. How do you handle that diplomatically?
To start off, I would say even communication with the monitor and the front of house guy now, I would think that communication is gone away a lot now, because I think the monitor tech or the monitor guy is usually calling and needing the systems engineer now, mainly more than the front of house guy, or vice versa. Or the front of house guy is telling the systems engineer to call the stage instead of the 2 engineers directly talking. So Tim's probably taking the brunt of the intercom calls from the stage. Number one, I would assume. I know that's how we normally work. And if it's usually, for me, if there's an issue, it's too much sub information on the deck. But other than that, that's somebody like my tech would call. He wouldn't interrupt me, have my pull my ears out to jump on the shout or to jump on an intercom. It'd usually go, monitor systems engineer to front of house systems engineer. And you get a call like the low end thing. Everybody kind of knows what the signals are and the signs are. There's not much talking anyway. So the things that are apparent a lot. But as far as I don't get involved with the opening act stuff too much, because I tell you what, you tell me this, Tim, because you're probably touring with a lot more variety of bands. But I got to say, from the small baby openers up into even the bigger openers are carrying a monitor engineer, or they're carrying some rack mounted all-in-one system that they're controlling. And we normally just give them power now. If they need a wedge or something, they can use anything I have. I don't mind at all. But they usually carrying or have some sort of system that they're using to do one-offs on, because I think a lot of bands, especially in the opening slots, are doing one-offs in between a headliner's tour. But Tim, you can probably elaborate if more bands are coming in needy or not. But I don't see them being as needy at all as they used to be. They pretty much come in self-contained.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, on the entry-level gear, the prices dropped to the point where just about anybody could afford some sort of mixing console and some sort of system to distribute their audio. So yeah, you're right. For the most part, it's not, we have to dig into every single spare that we've got to get the support acts on the stage. They've got a lot of their stuff, and some of them, the direct support, they're just as sponsored by a given microphone manufacturer as the headliner is. And so they've got all their own mics and usually their own stands. And for the most part, either show them power or drop them some quad boxes or whatever it is. On the Travis Scott thing that Pooch and I did specifically, because that was a DJ and a couple of guys shouting into microphones, nobody brought their own mixing engineer. And so I decided it would be best to let some of the younger guys on the crew get a chance to mix in a PA that big. Also,
younger guys, Pasta's younger.
Well,
Pasta was killing it out there.
He's a bit al dente.
Old guys rule. Shout out to Pasta. Cool. I just wanted to talk just a little bit more about specifically the curve. We got a bunch of questions. I was looking at some questions while you guys were talking about what I expect from my PA being, you know, what the curve looks like when you're talking about smart. You know, I'm pretty, what do you call it? I'm pretty picky about that range from like 90 to like 250. There's a slope that has to be there that is, if it's not right, it doesn't work for me. And then the rest of it, I just want linear out. Can you speak to that just a little bit? Just what it is that you have learned over the years? Because I feel like that's the hardest part of PAs, where the sub meets the low end, right? Is that what you think?
Yeah, definitely. Because you can end up in a situation where there's a chasm between what's going on in your top boxes and what's going on in your subs, and then there's no glue there to tie it all together. And then you've also got situations where either the room's giving you a whole bunch of extra 100 for free that you didn't want to begin with, or the PA, say on an L acoustics rig, the PA, the zoom factor is set way higher than it ought to have been given the amount of PA that you've got. And so there's definitely tools there to help with that slope. I mean, we talk about the haystack and the low end, which if you'd imagine a field with a bale of hay sitting on it, that's not really that productive anymore. And we've all sort of gotten to the point where we realize that it doesn't want to be a very pronounced thing and then a flat line. It wants to sort of trail off because of the response you just spoke about, because otherwise you've just got all this low end kicking you in the chest, but nothing for the bass guitar to glue it together with the kick drum, so that by the time we get up in the guitar frequencies and the vocal frequencies, it actually sounds like a cohesive thing. So yeah, you're right. Most people, and that's what I would also call an L acoustics frequency response.
Right.
That's their traditional go-to sort of a thing. And I think there's a reason for that. It's what sounds most pleasant to the human ear, but also most PA companies, L Acoustics, Adamson, Clair, all the rest of it. I mean, we're all sort of mimicking each other in that frequency response, because we all know that brick wall filters at 48 dB per octave don't work, even though we originally thought they might, and other things like that. So yeah, I think we're all, as an industry, we're all headed towards that same place, and we've had to find it out. Well, you know, slower than I guess we might have wanted.
So in your philosophy, in that when we go from PA to PA, let's say we're on a festival run and every day is different. Do you look at your trace of what I normally am giving you and try to replicate that trace on all of these different signature kind of PAs? Is that how you work?
That is definitely the first place that I start, you know, and as people, as audio people, we all have the frequencies that we all hate. You know, and those are persons.
What are your frequencies you hate?
3.5 is one of my least
3.5 is horrible. Who wants 3.5?
But also too much 90, you know, that's no fun.
Real.
But 90 used correctly can really warm up a bass guitar and sound great. So to that end, usually on a PA du jour type gig, I will look at our average amplitude response and what the PA that we have that day is doing, and look at those very scientifically, and look to see if there's any sort of anomalies across the two, and then crack it open with some music or a voice or something that we all know, and then go from there, if that makes any sense. So I'd like to try to bake the cake first and then try to frost it, if that's
no, that's cool. I mean, I know that from my perspective as a mixer, I appreciate a system engineer that kind of gets us in the ballpark of what I like. So for instance, when I show up on a J series PA, which the preset of the J series has very much that, you know, slope where there's almost there's no high end above 10K. You know what I mean? It's like super sloped, and that's their preset. That's what they like. I appreciate a system engineer that works hard at trying to get me that stuff back, however he does it with EQ or whatever, and gets me kind of in the ballpark with that linear PA, even though the manufacturer preset is something different. Is that kind of, do you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. And it goes back to that relationship thing, right? If we're both being open and honest with each other about the expectations, then it's a lot easier to be what you'd call hand in glove. right? It's a lot easier for me to go, well, this is what I know that he normally likes. These are the things that I know that he doesn't like. And I'm going to do my best with the tools I've got today to make it ballpark reasonable, so that by the time you walk up from having, say, I don't know, spent your day bouncing down stereo pairs to put on a YouTube channel or whatever, you don't have to come out and go, well, you've given me a broken PA this morning. What is wrong with you? You know what I mean?
Hey, can I get
right. And I think if you don't learn anything from this hour conversation, is that the most important thing is not audio here. The most important thing is relationships between people and the communication that happens between us to achieve a goal. I think that's true in anything that you do in life, but in our lives where we live together and we're together 24 hours a day, it's like working with family. And if we can't communicate about what our needs are, then you can't get any result as an audio guy. So I think it's important that people kind of learn from there. We're coming to the end.
Yeah, can I get in a question real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to, so something we probably skipped over real quick. As independent engineers, it's really hard to find training. You know, you got to do it yourself and call around and get all that kind of stuff and pay for it yourself. How do you get trained?
How do I get trained?
Yeah.
Claire has world-renowned training. We have, in my opinion, the best support system of any audio company out there, possibly any touring company. We have offices all over the globe. The sun does not set on the Claire Empire, not to keep flying that flag. But our head of training, he does a really good job of making sure that we understand how to use the given products that we are deployed.
You can give him a shout out if you want.
Oh, Dave Lester?
Yeah.
Yeah, give him a shout.
Yeah,
Dave Lester.
Love that guy.
He's great at his
He's an avid cyclist as well, isn't he?
Yeah, and a certified genius as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, the training can be difficult if you're sort of outside of that support system. And I do get that. And I don't, other than reaching out on your own, I don't even begin to know where to start, because I've been working for Claire for 11 years, coming up on 12, I think, at this point. So I've always found it very easy to approach the people that do our training and ask questions and see if I can get resources to help me do my job. So as far as a person who's independent, I could see where that would be a struggle.
Yeah,
I do think that this is the time. We're all stuck at home, man. This is when you should be learning all you can learn about anything.
I know I've been following those Digico courses, and Matt Napier had a great one, and Digico's done a great job with the ones I've been watching.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of, I would suggest to you to think outside the box. So for instance, audio networking is the way of the future, right? There's two things. There's AI, artificial intelligence, it's coming, people, and networking, right? Those are the two things that are the most important in audio coming. So think outside the box and don't go and just learn Dante. Go to a site that teaches about normal networking, about the world of networking, and how do we assign IP addresses? How do we get things to other places in networking? Use your head, think outside the box. You have all this time, utilize it, be at home and do, there's tons of courses about all kinds of things. Hey, Tim, before we go, do you have any story about Tater or myself that is a good one or a funny one? Or I can't wait to hear what you say about me or Tater. What do you?
One of my favorite things about Tater was, like I said, it was a festival run, and so it was stage du jour, PA du jour, all of that fun stuff. And I'd come up with a snake from front of house, and he would look at my work and he'd say, "Tim, is that your best work?"
Is that good enough for MTV?
I think to quote me properly was, is that your personal best?
No, you're right. Yes. Yeah. Is that your personal best? Is that today's personal best?
Is that your today's personal best? Yeah.
And sadly, sometimes my answer had to be, you know what, I was in a hurry, buddy. And I'm sorry. Yeah. I wasn't thinking about
I think I accepted it. You gave the right answer. Yeah.
But yeah, that was, It was a fun conversation every day, especially when the stage, the snake had to come up through a different hole, or power had come from the other side of the planet, for that matter, or the Jenny guys weren't paying attention to their Jennies and they blew up.
What I think is the funniest part about that story is that not just you, but about 5 other system engineers have all come to front of house and said, yeah, Tater just asked me if that was my personal and I know it's coming. And, I mean, listen, part of the reason that Tater is super good at what he does, and you guys learn from this out there, is that he's super OCD about where stuff goes, right? Like, Tater, what's the worst thing that I could do to you if I walked up to you and your little table on the side there?
You touch something.
That's right.
I know it's moved. And I know somebody's messed with it, and I got to check it again. I got to say something. I know we're over time, but I got to say something real quick. I've taken a lot of heat over my accessories table for all those years. Right? And you look at what's on that accessory table now, and it's going to be, in the times to come, it's going to be, everyone's going to have all that stuff on those tables now, just like I've had for years. Just throwing that out there.
So you're saying you're ahead of your time. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
You are definitely ahead of your time. If you don't know, Tater, he's speaking about, literally, he has a table that has, what's on there, Tater? It's like, wet wipes and special towels and
Q-tips.
Well, you've got all the artist's personal cleaning supplies and all that stuff, because you don't want to get them sick, obviously. And I don't want to be the cause of their ears getting sick. So
you're going to have to add a whole other COVID table now.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. I think my table was already COVID approved.
You are ahead of the curve, Tater. You always have been. You always will be. Listen, Tim Shaner, thank you so much for coming, dude. And, I think that a lot of people out there are really interested to hear from system guys, and thank you so much. And we appreciate everything that you do. We're going to do some Q&A after this, guys. So look for that. What
about next week's guest?
Next week's guest is, go ahead, Tater.
Jesse Adamson.
That's right. Jesse Adamson is going to be joining us next week. If you don't know
Adamson
Jesse,
family.
Yes.
If you don't know Jesse, Jesse is the son of Brock Adamson of Adamson Speakers, and for years and years was helped Adamson to kind of really hit into the market there, and helped his father, who developed great speakers, start to be known by engineers like us, and turn them into what they are now. Also, now he works for Sound Image. So he has a really interesting take on the business in regards to being a business development guy for Sound Image. Super smart dude, knows all kinds about speakers. So we're looking forward to having him next week.
It's our first international guest.
That's true.
That's true.
First international guest. And we'll dive into the relationships that independent engineers have to have, or should have, with the manufacturing and sound company relationships.
For sure. Thanks a lot for coming, guys. Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
Best, man.
Thank you very much for having me.
We love you, and we will see you guys next week. It's Tuesdays, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We'll be here next week. Talk to you soon. Take care.
That went quick.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.